Okay, we are up to chapter 14. If you were, well, as I guess a lot of you watched that little video clip I sent, I thought that was like
That
such a
was
great,
great.
it was a great recap of some of the things we've been talking about. So that was good timing. We are up to chapter 14. And we're in the midst of discussing the Benoni, this possible man, right? Really trying to figure out what is it that's expected of us. We said different things about the Benoni. We gave different tools. One of the big tools that we spoke about that a Benoni uses is the concept of mind control, being mindful, not just doing whatever my heart feels like, but knowing that I have a natural ability to control myself. Um, in this chapter, we're exploring further a little more about the Benoni. And like I wrote in the email, the big question we're coming in with is like, let's be practical. Like what's actually expected of me? Some of the things we said about Benoni sound very lofty. Someone who never does anything wrong. All they do, they're always doing the right thing. Um, it sounds a little bit out of touch, I think, to a lot of people. Um, there's a there's a Hasidic saying that goes something like this. You can't fool God, and ultimately, you can't fool other people either. The only one you can fool is yourself, and to fool a fool is no great achievement. You can sit with that for a few minutes. But the bottom line is we need to be honest with ourselves. We can fake it, we can pretend, we could say a lot of things to others, to ourselves, but at the end of the day, we need to be honest with ourselves, and we really want to try to understand what is it that is expected of me to do, and what can I realistically accomplish? Hi Harriet, and hi anyone who just jumped in. I can't see all the faces. So I think before we start chapter 14, I'll demonstrate with this little exercise. So by show of hands, is there anyone here who has a food that they absolutely abhor? Like they're totally disgusted they could barely be in the same room as this food? Any volunteer? No one has food that they don't like? Like really, really don't like? Like
Unfortunately,
cheese?
I like everything.
You
How
like
about
everything.
how
Okay.
about octopus? Like I
Um,
look at people eating it and I just am disgusted.
okay. For the purpose of this exercise though, I need it to be a food that would be kosher. So
Oh,
a certain
I knew
fruit, a
you were
certain
gonna say
vegetable.
that. I knew it.
With
Is liver kosher?
liver could be kosher, yeah.
Okay, use liver because that has to be the most disgusting thing. And people love chopped liver. I
I
know, but
love I
it's
love liver in any fashion. I love
oh my God.
yeah.
Okay,
So
so
my
Lorraine, I'm going to
kids,
talk to you about liver.
okay, wait, I
Um,
have to tell you something really funny. My kids had a kindergarten teacher who, if you ever picked them up late, she would say, "Oh, it's a good thing you got here. I was about to feed them liver on a stick." And so, like, it's become this thing for all of us. Liver on a stick. Okay, go ahead. I'm home.
okay, so first we need to establish two things. So for starters, are you allergic to liver in any way?
No,
Okay, so you're not allergic. That means your doctor doesn't have an issue with it.
no.
And kosher liver is kosher, so God doesn't have an issue with it either. Okay.
Okay.
So now, Lorraine, assume that I offered you a choice. I'm gonna make a bet with you, and the winner of the bet gets $1 million. I'm
Okay.
giving you three choices of bets that you can choose.
Okay.
Number one would be if you can get yourself to actually love liver, like right now. Like
No.
love it so much, we'd have this is all theoretical, but we'd have a lie detector test that can really test. We're gonna ask you a whole bunch of questions about how much you love liver. And if you answer positively and the lie detector tells us that you're speaking the truth, then I will pay you $1 million. And if not, then you pay me $1 million. That's option A. Option B,
Not taking that one.
option B would be something like this. Option B is if I tell you, Lorraine, regardless, forget about whether you like liver or not. If you eat 1 ounce of liver every day for a year,
Oof.
365 days, 1 ounce every day, in exactly 1 year, I will pay you $1 million. We have some way of testing and making sure that every day you ate 1 ounce. If you miss even one day, then I won. But if you eat it every day, then you get the $1 million. Hi, Barbara.
Okay.
And the third option would be you don't actually have to eat any liver, but I'm giving you 1 year to get yourself to like liver. And in 1 year from now, you're again going to take a test. We're going to ask you a lot of questions. And if it turns out that you love liver and the lie detector tells us that you're all good, then I'll give you $1 million. Which
I'm
of
gonna
these
stay
bets,
broke.
which of these bets would you take?
So sadly, I'm gonna stay broke because I don't eat meat, and liver is the worst of all meats to me. So I wouldn't be able to do any of them. I really would.
Not even for $1 million.
I really would not. That's like saying to me, would you believe in Jesus for $1 million? Like, it's a value
Okay.
proposition to me. Like, to me, being a vegetarian is about my love for animals. And so it's a value proposition. So
Okay,
to me,
so
it's
we're
like,
saying that it's no longer something that you don't like. There's something else to it because it's also about values.
yeah. But I
Okay.
didn't like it when I was a kid and we had to eat liver like once
So
a month.
let's assume that the liver, just for argument's sake, let's assume the liver is vegetarian liver.
Okay. Okay. It's
Okay?
tofu liver. Yes.
It still tastes like liver 100%.
Okay.
And
Yep.
now you have a choice either to love it immediately,
No.
to eat a little bit every day, even if you don't love it,
Okay.
or not to eat any, but to get yourself to love it in a year from now. Which of those, if you had to rank those from easiest to hardest,
So the third one's the easiest. It goes backwards. So the third one would be the easiest, and then the middle one, and then number one is impossible.
you think it would be the easiest to get yourself to really love it in a year?
Well, you said I didn't have to eat it.
You didn't have to eat any of it, but you have to really love it. Not
And
say
and
that you love it, not lip service, but like
okay, and what's
really,
number
really love
two?
it.
What's number two?
Number two is you don't have to like it, but you need to eat a little bit every day for a year. Like
Okay, then yeah, because I'm not going to change whether I like it. So that one's the easiest, and then the third one is second easiest, and the first one there's just no way that that could happen.
so BCA.
Yes.
Does anyone have any thoughts about, if swap out liver for something else that you don't like? What do you think would be most doable, least doable? Anyone have thoughts? Arlene?
I think the same as Lorraine. I think the most doable would be the second because, yeah, you can force yourself to do something, but it's a whole lot harder to change your mindset or your
Not
feelings
even your
about
mindset,
it.
it's your feelings.
Your feelings about it, right? Yeah,
Right.
so I agree with that.
Right. And I agree with her as well. Lorraine, if I was your coach, your advisor, I would definitely tell you to stick with the second one.
Mhm.
The reason I brought up this exercise is to highlight something that we've spoken about before, we're going to speak about again now in this chapter, which is after outlining to us the different levels, we spoke about the level of a tzaddik. We said a tzaddik is someone who's changed internally, that the tzaddik only desires, only wants, only loves godly and holy things. When the tzaddik sees something that's not godly, that's self-indulgent, or that's negative, the tzaddik is repulsed. It's gross to him or to her. Then we said a Benoni is someone who acts like a tzaddik. They're doing everything right, but internally they haven't necessarily changed. Meaning the Benoni is not necessarily someone who internally loves to do only godly things, but the Benoni only does godly things, and the Benoni stays away from ungodly things. And then we said the level of the Rasha is somebody who internally obviously hasn't changed, but also externally, they sometimes do what's right and they sometimes might do what's not right. Now, and we spoke about this, but what the Tanya is going to reiterate in chapter 14 is what's the level that the Tanya is telling us that we can strive for? It lays it out very clearly. In chapter 14, it tells us the level of a tzaddik is not something you should be striving for. To get yourself to the place that you will only love godly things and be repulsed by anything ungodly, don't even try. That's the level of a tzaddik. Certain people are picked out for that level of service. That's not what's expected of you. What's expected of you is to try and act like a Benoni. A Benoni is someone who, regardless of how they feel, they have enough motivation to do the right thing, even if they don't feel like it. So in the example of the liver, the Benoni is somebody who sees a piece of liver, may or may not like it, but knows that I eat, it's not the best example in that way because the motivation for a Benoni is not a prize. But if somebody hates liver and they see the piece and they say, I only need to eat a little piece, I do this 365 times and I get my $1 million or whatever it is that I want, there's a certain amount of self-control that the person can have to overcome and do that thing. Yes, Arlene.
And if somebody does eat the liver or do the right thing time and again and again and again, ultimately it may end up to be something that they truly do want to do and enjoy.
100%. The Tanya is actually, you're skipping ahead, but yes, later in this chapter, the Tanya does say that. It says that regardless, yes, what do we say? The heart follows the action. There's a phrase in Hebrew that says that yes, after the actions, the heart comes after. So when you do something long enough, it could become second nature and it could become something that you're used to. And it says even more so, like it also will talk to us about how to develop, let's say, Lorraine, let's say you chose the third option, right? I have 1 year to start liking liver. Is that possible? Well, if not from now to now, but if you give me a year, what might I do to start liking something I don't like? Maybe I'll expose myself to it. Maybe I'll hang around, influencers who eat this thing and make it look very cool. And maybe I'll come up with nice recipes to make it more palatable. Maybe I'll read up about it and get inspired to like it. Like there's maybe different things that I can do to get myself to like it. It'll be a long process, but I could get there. And the Tanya will talk about that also, about working on ourselves to actually want to choose the right thing and like to do the right thing. But for starters, the first thing that Tanya establishes is to strive to be a Benoni means to strive to make the right decision every time, regardless of how I feel about it. I just want to read that little part inside, and then we're going to go to the feelings part. So let me see, chapter 14. Here we go. So now the rank of Benoni is one that is attainable by every man. Each person should strive after it if he has not yet attained it and should not think that it is beyond his reach. Nobody should say, I cannot be a Benoni, that's too difficult for me. A Benoni is absolutely possible for every person. Why is that? For every person can, at any time or hour, be a Benoni. Again, we shouldn't think of it as an all or nothing, as a lifetime commitment. No, at any moment I can decide I'm having a Benoni moment. Because a Benoni does not abhor evil, unlike the tzaddik. He doesn't find worldly pleasures revolting and loathsome. The Benoni doesn't say, oh my goodness, I don't want to do anything that's not godly. No, the Benoni is normal. The Benoni feels like doing a lot of things that are not okay. For this matter is entrusted to the heart. The concept of liking or disliking godly things or evil things, that's something of the heart, and as explained earlier, the Benoni has yet to conquer his heart. Consequently, he does not loathe evil. Also, not all times are alike. If I'm only relying on, liking the right things and disliking the wrong things, feelings fluctuate. So the Benoni is not someone who's relying on their feelings. The Benoni is someone who, we're going to talk later about what the Benoni does to work on his or her feelings, but on a very practical level, the Benoni is always trying to do the right thing. Rather, the task of the Benoni is only to turn away from evil and do good in actual practice, in deed, in speech, and in thought. So if I were to give an example, let's do an example of each, because we spoke about, we said thought, speech, and action, right? So let's say in thought, let's say the Benoni had a negative encounter with somebody, and that person was really awful to him or to her. And now, I know this probably doesn't happen to anyone here, but it is a common human trait where we get really mad at somebody and we just kind of wish that something bad will happen to them. Now, this Benoni, this aspiring Benoni, is struck by the thought of like, well, what if, this and this negative thing will happen to person X? And instead of, now you have two choices. You can push that thought away and say, nope, that's an awful thing to think. I'm not going to purposely think negatively about someone else. Or you can indulge in that thought. Even if it's not something you're actually planning to do, but there is a certain pleasure that a person gets of like sitting and imagining and indulging this thought of something horrible happening to, someone who I really don't like. The Benoni doesn't do that. When the Benoni has the opportunity and the temptation comes to consciously think negatively about someone else, the Benoni controls themselves. And we're gonna hear the tools of how the Benoni does that. When it comes to speech, what kind of a desire can a person have to speak negatively? What about just speaking gossip about someone else? Right? Did you hear? Do you know what she did? Do you know what she does in her house? Do you know what I heard? Right? There's it's a certain pleasure that we get out of speaking gossip. That's usually why we do it. We don't just, we do it because there's pleasure. That's just how God created us. Now, again, this aspiring Benoni has the opportunity to say something, or perhaps to crack a joke that 99% of the people in the room will find funny, but one person will get really offended at. But it's such a good joke. Like, it's going to feel so good to say it, right? So, again, the Benoni has the opportunity to do something, and in that moment, the Benoni says, no, I will stop myself from saying this. And of course, when it comes to action, right? Any action that's against the will of God, right? Like we've discussed sometimes we like to think of ourselves as good people. We're not talking about murder or, anything really crazy. But sometimes, let's say we're doing a little business deal and we have an opportunity to cut a little corner. Like maybe not fully disclosing the condition of the item that we're selling, because they didn't ask, so like I don't have to say what they didn't ask, right? And whatever it is, like sometimes we have the opportunity to bend the rule just a little bit and do something that's like slightly dishonest, but we convince ourselves that it's okay. Again, the Benoni has the opportunity to do that. They really feel like doing it, but regardless of how they feel, the Benoni will manage to stop themselves. What is it? What does the Benoni tell themselves to stop themselves from doing that action? Now, we've already established in a previous chapter that we all have a natural ability to control our heart, to have mind over matter, to do the right thing regardless of how I feel. In this chapter, the Tanya takes it a step further. Tanya says, what can I tell myself to get me to do the right thing even when I really don't feel like it? And the Tanya is going to give us a little meditation, like a self-talk that I can say to myself, and not just say it, but really think it and connect to it. And if I really connect to this line, it's really going to stop me from doing things. What's that line that I tell myself? So this is interesting. If I were to walk down the street and just ask people, what's your deepest desire? What kind of answers do you think I would get? Anyone? Deepest desire. I didn't hear you, Harriet.
Money. Financial wealth.
Yeah, money. A lot of people would say money. I think a lot of people would say health. A lot of people say family. A lot of people, everyone has their different things. What if I told these people, well, actually, I'm going to tell you your deepest desire. Your deepest desire is to be connected to God. I mean, some of them will just laugh at me. They'll think I'm crazy. And some people will say, yeah, I also want that, but I also want other things. The Tanya tells us in this chapter that for a Jewish person, someone who has a Jewish soul, your Jewish soul, your godly soul is the deepest, deepest part of you. It's within your body, so really within your natural soul, within your animal soul. Your deepest, deepest, deepest desire is the desire of the godly soul. And what does the godly soul want? Only to be connected to God. Remember, the godly soul has absolutely no desire for anything physical. The godly soul just wants to be connected to God and connected to godliness. And the greatest fear of the godly soul is to be disconnected from God. Now, it's interesting. I know we've mentioned this in the past, but we haven't spoken about it in a long time. There's an interesting phenomenon in Jewish history where we find that when Jews throughout history have been given the choice to deny their faith or be killed, meaning to be allowed to live as long as they convert or to die as a Jew, a huge, huge percentage have chosen to die as a Jew. And sadly, we've had many opportunities for this, throughout our history. But the concept of convert or die has come up so often in Jewish history. And by and large, Jews do choose to die rather than convert, or have chosen, I should say, in past tense. It doesn't mean everybody, of course. There are, different situations and different scenarios. But the truth is that it's not totally unique to Jews because, somebody who really, really, really strongly believes something, we've seen people of other faiths, of other beliefs, who have chosen to die for their beliefs. What's most unique about Jews, though, is that those who choose to die as a Jew are not necessarily the religious ones. For somebody who's very religious or very committed to a certain ideology, and they say, I'm going to die by this ideology, it makes sense. You believe it so much as someone, you're willing to die for it. But throughout Jewish history, you see that Jews who throughout their lifetime were minimally at best connected to Judaism. They weren't necessarily practicing Jews. They didn't openly identify as Jews. They didn't, necessarily keep kosher or keep Shabbat. But when they reached a moment and they were told, convert or die, they said, no, I'm going to die as a Jew. I know we mentioned this in the past in this class, but there's who was that American journalist, Daniel Pearl? You guys familiar with the story of Daniel Pearl? Daniel Pearl was an American journalist who was, I did not review the story before tonight, so correct me if I make any mistakes, but Daniel Pearl was an American journalist in Afghanistan, I believe. Yeah. Who was kidnapped, and eventually he was murdered on a video that they put out onto the internet. And they allowed him to make a final statement. And and I can probably just Google it right now. Let's see.
They decapitated him.
Right. I can't even think of it. So I can't even put the words to it. So what were the last words that Daniel Pearl said when they gave him the opportunity to make a statement before they did this to him on camera? What did he say? My name is Daniel Pearl. I'm reading, I found it. I found the quote, I'm reading it. My father is Jewish. My mother is Jewish. I am a Jew. Those were his final words. There were interviews later with his parents. His parents, lived in the US. And his mother said in one of the interviews, she says that she found it mind-blowing that this is what her son would say. She's like, we're not religious people. My son was never a religious person. Being Jewish was an afterthought. It's nothing we actively did or thought about. It's not like he was this religious guy. But the last words he chose to say were, I am a Jew. I was born a Jew. I'm going to die as a Jew. And we have seen that repeatedly throughout Jewish history. And now the Tanya says in this chapter, the Tanya tells us, you know why? You know why this happens to Jews? Because that's the expression of our godly soul. That godly soul inside of us it might be latent, it might not be expressing itself openly. But when push comes to shove, when that soul feels like it's about to be disconnected, it's going to scream out and say, no, not converting. I'm going to die as a Jew. Now, in this day and age, thank God, we don't see this, right? Most people today aren't faced with that challenge of, convert or die. But you know where you do see it? You do see a great reluctance among Jews to deny their Jewish identity. If you were to go to, and we can all think of, someone who is self-proclaimed atheist, or maybe not atheist, but doesn't identify Jewishly, doesn't do anything Jewish, not proud to be Jewish, doesn't advertise that they're Jewish. If you were to go to this person and say, well, so wait, do you keep Shabbat? No. Do you keep kosher? No. Do you believe in God? No. And then if you were to make a statement to them and say, well, then I guess you're not really Jewish, what would they say? Oh, the outrage, right? Vast majority of Jews would say, how dare you? Who do you think you are to say, of course I'm Jewish. What makes you think I'm not Jewish just because, It's very hard to find a Jew who will, now again, some of them will hide it and they won't advertise it. But if you put them to a corner and you say, well, then you're not a real Jew or you're not actually Jewish, suddenly this like anger comes out. You're like, well, where did that come from? I mean, I just asked you, do you fast on Yom Kippur? No. Do you keep kosher? No. Would you eat pork? Yes. Would you eat pork on Yom Kippur? Yes. So then why do you care if I say you're not really a Jew? Something inside them. And the Tanya tells us in this chapter, when the godly soul feels like it's about to be disconnected, that's when it shouts. So whether it's, a gun to someone's head, convert or die, or whether it's someone telling someone that you're no longer Jewish and they feel like, oh my God, my last bit of Jewish identity is disappearing, that's a natural phenomenon of the godly soul. So why are we bringing this up? The Tanya says, here's the meditation. When a person says to themselves, I know that deep down, I never want to be disconnected from God. I don't want to be disconnected. My godly soul refuses to be disconnected. Now, I should preface this and say, why is it then that the same person who refuses to deny their Jewish identity has no problem eating pork, has no problem violating a lot of, Jewish things? Because the Tanya tells us there's something called a ruach shtut. It's a foolishness that overcomes a person. And in that spirit of foolishness, the person convinces themselves that this is not really going to affect my Jewish identity. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to eat pork because I want to do something ungodly. No, when someone who's, eating something not kosher, they tell themselves, this is not going to change my Judaism. I could still be Jewish, right? Doing X, Y, Z, whatever it is. Everyone has their red lines. Everyone has they say, that's not a big deal. I could be a good Jew and still do this. I could be a good Jew and I could still do that. Now, we have different lines, right? Some people will say, I don't keep kosher, but I would never eat pork. I would never eat shrimp. Why is that? I mean, non-kosher food is technically from the Torah's perspective is just as bad as eating other things. But what the person tells themselves and perceives to themselves is that that's not really disconnecting me. If I eat pork, that's a real disconnect. But if I eat that thing, well, that one's okay. And everyone has their different thing. There are Jewish parents who tell their kids, I don't care what you do. You can do anything you want. I don't care about Judaism. I don't care. But in our family, you only marry Jewish. Like, wait a second. You didn't care to send me to Hebrew school. You didn't care to teach me about Shabbat. You didn't care about kosher. You don't care about anything. But you care who I marry? For this parent, for whatever reason, due to their upbringing, due to their experiences, they feel that marrying out, that would be the ultimate disconnect. So whatever it is that we feel would be the disconnect, that's our red line. And that red line will look different for different people. So now the Tanya says, let's use that logic. If I know that if I were asked to, if I were to be asked to cross my red line, I would say no. So let me realize that the act that I'm about to do right now, speaking gossip about this person, offending somebody, bending the law this way, if I were to realize that if I do this for this moment, it's a moment of disconnect. I am disconnecting myself because I'm doing something God doesn't want. I am disconnecting myself from God in this moment. And we know that when it comes to spiritual things, every moment's eternal. So it's not like you say, oh, it's a moment. I don't ever want to be disconnected. I always want to be connected. So if I realize that if I take this action right now, I'm going to sever my connection in this moment, even if it's for a moment, then I realize, wait, I never want to be disconnected. I know the length to which I would go if I realized that I was being disconnected. I'm not going to take this action either. Let's read it inside before we discuss it. Yes, Harriet.
So I mean, we're all born with a Jewish soul, but we're also born with issues, that things that we need to work on, where we begin our journey in this lifetime. So I guess I'm wondering if somebody says their bottom line is, I'm not going to keep kosher, but I'm not going to eat pork and shellfish. And that they grew up eating pork and shellfish. That is that part of their journey to now say, okay, I'm taking a step forward. I can't go from eating pork and shellfish and cheeseburgers and and now I'm suddenly going to start keeping kosher, and that there are, and I'm asking, trying not to ration, that there are steps in moving toward that, and I guess is like God saying, well, nope, your godly soul wants a relationship with me, so that's not good enough. And do you see what I'm saying? I mean, that's
yeah, Harriet, I'm actually going to make your question even stronger. I'm going to say that if somebody grew up eating pork and shellfish and they decide one Sunday morning that I'm starting to keep kosher, like 100% kosher all of the time, there's a good chance that it's not going to last. It's not going to be sustainable. So I'm 100% in agreement with you that no one could change overnight. Habits it takes time and we have to do them slowly. I think we're talking about how do I get to that place? Meaning, I think it's okay if somebody grew up eating pork and shellfish and they say, now I'm eliminating pork and shellfish from my diet. I'm not ready to take on full kosher. I think that's fantastic as long as they realize that I'm on a trajectory. This is what I'm doing today. Let's see what I could take on tomorrow or next week. As long as I'm aiming, I know that I'm on the road and I'm aiming to get somewhere, then of course, every step in the right direction brings me closer. We don't want to be in a place where we say, well, since I grew up this way, for me, forever eating pork, just eliminating pork and shellfish, that's going to be as kosher as I'm ever going to get. I can never get more kosher than that. Then I'm limiting myself. I'm not allowing myself to get to the place that my godly soul really wants.
But if I take that step, am I getting closer? I mean, yes, in terms of doing commandments, but is my godly, given that we want to get closer to God, that's part of our desire in this world, am I getting closer to God if step one is not eating pork and shellfish?
100%. 100%. If you think about it as your godly soul in its purest form only wants to do godly things, wants to eat 100% kosher all of the time and do only holy things. Now, that over a lifetime of a lot of different habits and lifestyles that we've picked up, think of it as our godly soul is covered up. It's wearing all these garments that are foreign to it. And each thing that I change, I'm removing another one of these dirty garments, and I'm allowing my soul to express itself more. Every step, everything that I take on, I'm kind of clearing. I'm trying to think of a story I just heard. Wait, I want to make sure I get the story right. Okay, hope I'm not misquoting, but there was a chassid who was. Okay, we'll get the punchline. We'll get right. The details might be a little off, but this chassid was I think he was a diamond merchant, and he was sent by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to go and find Jews. You know, this was before in places where Chabad wasn't established, and you know, just to go and find Jews and help them connect Jewishly. And he met with different Jews, and a lot of them were like totally disconnected and unaffiliated, and he was, you know, finding Jews, and somebody asked him, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Why do you bother? And he came up with a really good example. He's like, well, I'm a diamond merchant, so I know diamonds. You know, sometimes you have to sit and you have to dig in the ground, and it looks like it's maybe all mud, and if you dig deep enough, you might find some diamonds. He's like, so he told the guy, that's what I'm doing. I'm digging through mud, and I'm looking for diamonds. Then he came back to New York, and he told the Rebbe, I found such a great way to explain what we're doing. We are digging through mud, and we're looking, and we're trying to find some diamonds. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, you're making a mistake. You're not digging through mud and looking for diamonds. You are going through diamonds. Some of them just need to be dusted off. It's not that you're finding diamonds and digging through mud. Every Jew is a diamond. Every godly soul is a diamond. We all have life experiences that haven't broken our diamonds. Our diamonds haven't disappeared, but they've become sullied, you know, each of us with our different life experience. And every time we connect more, we're polishing our diamonds. We're cleaning it off, another layer of dust, another layer of dust. So of course, every layer that I clean off brings me closer, makes me more connected, allows me to express my truest self. I can't expect that a diamond that was so dusty will, in an instant, in one cleaning, you know, become the most sparkling diamond. Anyway, I hope I didn't mess up that story. Arlene, go ahead.
I was just thinking about one of the examples you gave about people who are not observant at all, but are offended when somebody says to them, well, then you're not a Jew. I think that I think there are several levels that can be discussed upon. I think, first of all, people who are born Jewish are Jewish, and you know, and nobody would disagree with that. And then with regard to your commitment to observe what is in the Torah, you know, people very often opt to pick and choose. However, there are the commandments between man and God, and there are the commandments between man and man. And sometimes you wonder, you know, I don't think the Torah distinguishes which mitzvos are more important. I don't know that there's a scale, but sometimes you may have somebody who is quite observant with regard to kosher, with regard to Shabbat, and then might be abhorrent when it comes to the way they are with other human beings, you know. So I mean, I just feel like there a bunch of people
100%.
will take affront to that. I would take affront to that, because bottom line is, You are a Jew.
100%. I completely agree with you. I would even
Yeah.
say, I would say more so, the Torah doesn't differentiate what's more important, less important, but sins that are between man and God are very easy to atone for. I just have to regret it, apologize, and I'm instantly forgiven. Sins between man and man is much harder. I need to get the other person's forgiveness before God even wants to hear from me. So being kind and being a mensch and all those mitzvot that are between man and man are super important, and they're just as part of the Torah as the other parts. And anyone who looks down at anyone else who's in a different place at a different level doing different things than them, there's no justification in Judaism for that. It's absolutely not okay. No one knows what goes on behind closed doors. That same person who might appear so religious and so righteous, you have no idea how they handle their business, how they speak to their spouse, how they talk to their kids. There's 613 commandments. There's so many things. And I don't think someone should ever say anything like that to anyone. But what the Tanya is focusing on here is that thought, the concept. Let's say it's not a religious person who says that to them. Let's say it's their kid. Let's say the kid says, "Mom, you never cared if I ate kosher, if I went to synagogue, if I did Hebrew school, if I did X, Y, and Z. Why do you care if I marry someone not Jewish? Like, why do you care?" And the mom says, "Because we're Jewish, and in our family, we only marry Jewish." And then try to explain that. Where's that coming from? Why is it suddenly so? Because for this mom to allow her kid to marry someone not Jewish would be equivalent to saying, "We're no longer Jewish." And no one's willing to say that. There's you'll find Jews who call themselves atheist Jews. I'm an atheist Jew. I'm an atheist. I'm still a Jew. I'm not willing to say I'm no longer Jewish. I'm an atheist. No, I'm an atheist Jew. Or I heard this
Perhaps a cultural Jew.
right, but still a Jew. I am still, they'll never agree to say I'm no longer a Jew. And you might say, so what are you doing Jewish? What's Jewish about you? Maybe even if you no longer speak to your family and you don't care about Jewish things and you don't believe in anything Jewish and you're not even part of the Jewish culture, you're not part of the Jewish community, you're doing everything non-Jewish. Why is it so hard for you to just say, forget it, I'm not Jewish anymore? If I offered you $1 million, would you agree to say I'm no longer Jewish? Vast majority of Jews would not. They just wouldn't. I don't want to be, I can't allow that disconnect. When I feel that I'm about to be disconnected, I won't allow it. There's even this term, they call themselves Jewboos, like Buddhist Jews. Jews who got into the whole Buddhist thing. They're not willing to call themselves Buddhists. They're not Buddhists. They're Jewboos because they're always going to be that Jew part in them. It's a fascinating thing. So the Tanya says, here's the meditation. When I am facing a situation, now, this is not when I'm facing the do all or nothing or jump to something I'm not ready for. But when there's a situation in front of me, let's say I am the Jew who grew up eating pork and shellfish, and I am now trying to avoid eating pork and shellfish. What can I tell myself when I'm facing one of these food items that looks really appealing and really appetizing, and there's a part of me that says, oh, come on, just this one time, who really cares? What difference is it really going to make? What's the meditation that I could tell myself? I could tell myself this. Wait, if someone were to ask me to declare myself as not Jewish, would I do it? No. If somebody were to hold a gun to my head and say, convert or die, would I do it? No. So what I'm about to do is an act of disconnect. I'm about to do an act of disconnect that's honestly just as disconnected as declaring myself not Jewish. I've managed to rationalize it to the point that I say, who cares? It's nothing. But let me tell myself, it actually is a big deal. What I'm about to do is going to be a moment of disconnect. If I wouldn't declare myself as not Jewish, and I wouldn't allow myself to, disconnect from being Jewish even for a moment, then I shouldn't allow myself to take part in this particular thing. And this, we're going to read it inside in a moment, but this self-talk, this like meditation that the Tanya gives us, it accomplishes two things. Firstly, it slows down the process. Remember, we said the animal soul is very emotional. It's like, I see it, I want it now, right? And if I do this talk with myself, it slows me down and says, wait a second, we have to think about it. Let's talk about it. And somehow when I process things, then suddenly it helps the like right, I'm in the mood of like saying this great joke. It's like at the tip of my tongue, but I know it's going to offend someone in the room, right? So it feels so urgent because it's coming from an emotional place. But if I go through that rationalization and I start talking to myself about it, by the end of this, dialogue with self, I guess you could call it just a monologue. It's the joke doesn't seem as urgent anymore. It lost its excitement because it wasn't in the moment, right? So having this dialogue with myself, it slows it down, so it allows me to really think. The other thing it does is it gives voice to my godly soul. Because we have to realize that the godly soul is inside me. The godly soul desperately wants to connect to godliness and desperately wants to avoid any level of disconnect. But I manage to cover it up most of the time. I mean, my godly soul is inside my physical body. And when I feel hunger, when I feel thirst, and when I feel anger, and when I feel insulted, those are things that come to the forefront. And my godly soul is kind of sitting there quietly, upset, feeling disconnected, but it doesn't have a voice. When I have this dialogue with myself, I'm voicing what the godly soul would be telling me. And it allows it, at least, even if ultimately I fail, like it doesn't work. But I gave a voice to my godly soul and I sensitized myself to the fact that there is another part inside of me. There is the true me that doesn't really want me to do this. I want to read the meditation inside before we discuss it further. It's right here where we have it highlighted. So here, when a person's facing a desire, he can conquer this desire and divert his attention from it altogether by declaring to himself or saying to his heart as follows: I do not want to be a Russia. That is, succumbing to the animal soul even for a moment. I don't want a moment of disconnect, because under no circumstance would I want to be parted and severed, God forbid, from the one God. As it is written, your iniquities separate you. I know that when I do something God doesn't want, it separates me. It creates like a barrier. By reflecting on the fact that sin separates one from God, one will conclude that he does not wish to be a Rasha, since he will thereby sever his bond with him. And in this way, a person can always turn away from evil, refrain from sin, although his heart craves it. Similarly, if I'm facing a positive commandment, like the ability to do a mitzvah, that I could sit back and say, whatever, I'm going to pretend it's not there, or I have the ability to jump in and help someone, save someone, return a lost object, visit the sick, light Shabbat candles, do something Jewish. Again, I could say to myself, I desire instead to unite my nefesh, ruach, neshama, to unite my soul with God through investing in his three garments, through connecting to him through my thought, speech, and action. This desire to unite with God arises out of a love of God that is surely hidden in my heart, although I do not feel it, just as this love is found in the heart of all Jews who are called lovers of your name, by reason of their inherent love of God, although they do not always feel this love consciously. So again, the Tanya is telling us every Jew, by nature of being a Jew, you have this hidden love, the Tanya calls it, that spark of God inside you that won't allow you to disconnect. It's a hidden love because you don't feel it on a daily basis, and you don't walk around saying, I want to do Jewish things, I want to be proudly Jewish. It's hidden, but it exists. For this reason, even a kal shebekalim, the Tanya was what the Tanya calls, what we say, an unworthy Jew, someone who doesn't have anything, doesn't do anything Jewishly, is not learned, is not in part of the Jewish community. Such a person is still capable of sacrificing his life for the sanctity of God, should he be forced to deny him, God forbid. Surely I'm not inferior to him. This is like another part of the meditation. The person says, I know that deep down I really want to be connected to God. I don't want to take this action that's going to disconnect me for a moment. And then I say to myself, I know that even the simplest Jew, the most unlearned Jew, the most seemingly disconnected Jew, if they were forced to deny God, they would even give up their life. I'm not less than that person. Why would I take this moment of disconnect now? As will be explained in later chapters, the ability of even the lowliest Jew to give up his life for God stems from every Jew's innate hidden love of God, which is activated and aroused when he feels that he's being torn away from him. But okay, so just to finish this off, so now that Tanya asked the question, 1 second. If this simple Jew, who we're calling simple, is someone who would risk their life to hold on to their Judaism, they're not a simple Jew. Why are we calling them a simple Jew? Why do they seem like a simple Jew? If this person's willing to give up their life for Jewishness, then why aren't they acting Jewish ever? Why are they denying their Jewishness openly? Why are they proclaiming to be an atheist? Why are they fighting against the Jewish community? Why are they doing all these things if deep down this is someone who would give up their life for God? Because Tanya says the only reason that a person ever does something that's against God, it is only because a spirit of folly has overcome him. As our sages say, no man sins unless overcome by a spirit of folly. He imagines that committing the sin will not affect his Jewishness, and that his soul will not be severed thereby from the God of Israel. In fact, at the moment that a Jew sins, he becomes separated from God, whereas were the Kal Shebekalim to realize this, he would never sin. It's a spirit of folly that deludes him into thinking otherwise. This is basically telling us that the Tanya says nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do something against God. I want to deny my Jewishness. And I think we could all probably speak from experience. When someone chooses to do something that God doesn't want, something immoral, usually they rationalize it. This one time won't be such a big deal. Or God doesn't really care about these details. I mean, come on. God doesn't care about everything. There's some things God cares about. I don't know. On Yom Kippur, I'll go to synagogue. That I know God cares about. But, speaking gossip, like seriously, God doesn't care. Just this one time, I'm sure God will be okay if I have a good laugh, right? Whatever it is that our red line is, all those things that we allow ourselves to do, it's not coming from a malicious place. It's coming because we convince ourselves and we rationalize to ourselves that really, this is not the end of the world. This is really okay. Because if I were really to feel that this is going to disconnect me from God, I wouldn't do it. So the Tanya says, use this logic in the reverse. When you're trying to make a decision that's really hard for you, that you know already that God doesn't want you to do it, but you really, really want to do it, and it's very hard to overcome that, but you say, wait, a Benoni always overcomes. A Benoni always does what God wants him to do. How do I be a Benoni in this moment if I really want to do that? Well, here's a thought that I can use. Again, this is another tool in our toolbox. We have the tool of the ability of our mind to control our heart. This is another tool of a meditation where I could take that a step further. And there are other tools, but this is where the Tanya tells us every Jew has the ability to do the right thing all the time. And we take it one moment at a time. Now, I want to say we have not reached the end of the chapter. We're going to continue with this chapter next time. I just want to sum up quickly for those who I know need to log off at 9. The bottom line is the first part of this chapter tells us what is expected of me. What can I be? I definitely can be a Benoni. Every single person can realize that, can get to that level of Benoni. How is that? Firstly, we take it moment by moment. It's not saying, oh, I can live my life perfectly. No, in every moment when I need to make a decision, I can make the decision to do the right thing. How is that? Because naturally my mind has control over my heart. And even though I really want to do something, I could stop myself from doing it, or I could get myself to do the thing that I know is right, even if I don't feel like it. Secondly, I can, because a Benoni doesn't have to change their internal feelings, even if I don't feel like doing it and I still do the right thing, again, I could still attain a level of Benoni. A Benoni is someone who, regardless of how they feel, they're still doing the right thing. And the next thing is, another way to help me do the right thing when I'm faced with a difficult decision is realizing that deep down, I would never want to be disconnected. I know I don't want to be disconnected. So if I can really allow myself to realize that this particular action would disconnect me, then it's going to stop me from doing it. The last part of the chapter that we're going to do next time is we're going to try to answer, what can we learn from a tzaddik though? Is there any hope for me? You know, like that thing we spoke about with Lorraine in the beginning about, can I get myself to like liver? Can I get myself to actually want to do what God says so that it's not a battle every single time? And the short answer is yes, I could get myself. I won't get myself to do it 100% of the time. It's not going to be reliable because that's only a tzaddik. Only a tzaddik could get themselves to only want godly things all the time. As someone who's a typical human who at most can aspire to be a Benoni, I can aspire to do right all the time. I can't aspire to feel and desire right all the time, but I could work on sensitizing myself to actually want to do it more than I don't want to do it. And that's going to be, that we'll do next time, the second half of the chapter of how do I start working on my emotions so that I'm not always fighting myself. I actually am inspired to do the right thing, at least some of the time, if not all of the time. Yes, I know there were a few hands, a few questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. Sarah, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna make an observation. The struggle seems to be if you're going to do something like a sin, then you should say, I want to avoid this because I don't want to have the disconnect. I wonder if the reverse could be said as well, meaning instead of saying, I'm going to do a sin, how do you get yourself to do something that's a mitzvah, but you just don't want to, like, you don't have that sort of inspiration, motivation.
In the Tanya, the meditation goes both ways. The Tanya says both. It says that then when a person is faced with the opportunity to do a positive commandment, let me see. The person says, I know that what the meditation says, I know that I deeply, deeply desire to be connected. And I know that even a Kal Shebekalim, even a simple Jew would give up their life to be able to be connected. I have a moment, an opportunity to be really connected right now. How would I deny this to my godly soul? This is what my godly soul really wants. It really wants this moment of connection.
I just wanted to connect it to the beginning when you referred to the boy that we're dedicating the learning to. I heard you say something along the lines of, may this be, the thing that tips in the scale. I think that could also be a mind frame to include from this disconnect conversation, because to me, the disconnect thing is extremely negative and it's very harsh. And I would rather, me personally, I can only talk for myself, I would rather try to come to a position where I want to do this, as opposed to sort of forcing myself to do something. I want to come to the point of having that emotion behind it. It's true, I can make myself do or not do in terms of action, but the thoughts and the feelings may or may not come. Whereas if I do all three of them, that's a lot better. Wouldn't you agree?
No, 100%. And that's why we're kind of stopping in the middle of a conversation. The end of this chapter goes into that part and then says, wait a second, even though I may not be able to attain tzaddik level where I just want to do it all the time, I do need to work on my emotions. Because like we said, how much self-control before I snap, like if I don't work on my emotions and my inside, then it's not going to be sustainable long-term. But the Tanya gives us this step first, because the Tanya doesn't want us to make the mistake of saying, well, let me work on my emotions, and when I really feel like doing Jewish, then I'll start doing everything God wants me to do. Because human nature is that we're never going to feel ready enough.
Oh, so this is step A or step
Yes,
one.
100%. Step one is you need to know that you have the ability to do the right thing even when you don't feel like it. That's step number one. A God-fearing Jew knows I could always make the right decision. Now, that's not all that God wants of me. Every day we say in the Shema, "B'chol levavecha," love God with all of your hearts. That means there's two parts of me that are supposed to, my entire me is supposed to be involved in serving God, not just my actions. What about my feelings? What about my emotions? What about my thoughts? All of me needs to be involved in the service of God. So that's when the Tanya is going to go on to talk about developing emotions, and yes, working on the love and the awe and all of that connection, which is super important. But the Tanya does put that second because, it's like, let's say I'm walking down the street with my kid, right? And a toddler is about to run into the street. So I have two options. I could sit down now and give them a whole long lecture and explanation about why it's really dangerous to be in the street and why you really shouldn't be standing in the street. Or it's like, wait a second, emergency. Pick them up, take them out of the street. And now when we come home tonight, we're going to have a conversation about it so that we can start building up their own knowledge and ability to do the right thing. The Tanya says, step number 1, you got to do the right thing. You can't wait to do the right thing. Step number 2, yes, you also need to be working on developing emotions. But as to what you said, Sarah, about the tipping the scale, that's a quote from Maimonides. Maimonides says that every person needs to think to themselves that the world is on a scale and the scale is perfectly balanced, 50-50, 50, equal amount of merits and equal amount of sin in the world. And at any moment, I can do something positive and I can tip the scale for positive for the whole world. That's a meditation that Maimonides gives to, along with what you said, Sarah, of like how to get myself to do the right thing when I'm not in the mood. If that works better for you, sure, like totally go with it. I think Tanya's kind of going into like, what if I really can't withstand the temptation? I mean, it just smells so good. It looks so good. My animal soul is telling me it's really not a big deal. Come on, God doesn't care. It's just this one time. This is something that I can tell myself to stop myself.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Barbara, you've been so quiet tonight. Usually you have some good thoughts to share. Yes, Lorraine.
So, from a psychological standpoint, I'm kind of relating to Sarah. Humans and our minds function better on the positive than the negative. And so if I say to myself, oh, I can do this and be closer to God, for my brain and the way that we are wired, that's a really powerful incentive as opposed to a negative. So I really appreciate that. And for me, you know, I remember when I think it was this exact one 2 years ago or something. This one is when I gave up shrimp because we were talking about it and I was like, well, I don't need to eat that. That's the only thing that I eat still that's not kosher. And, as a vegetarian, a pescatarian, because I do eat salmon. I don't eat shrimp because I ate no shellfish and all the rest of that yucky stuff. But I did eat shrimp, and I was like, well, dang, that seems pretty easy. So that was a positive that I could do rather than a negative. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's
100%. I would say
easier
toothpaste.
for humans and the way our mind is wired to go, oh, if this little tiny thing, this little tiny action, night, Lisa. Oh, she hopped off. Um, if this little tiny action makes me closer to God, okay, that's a no-brainer. So, but I just want to throw in, because Sarah, thank you for doing the positive negative, because I was thinking that and wondering about that. But I also want to throw in, because you quoted me tonight, because I basically said to my boys, like, I don't care what you do, but you quoted me, but you are marrying a Jewish girl and you are like, and they're meeting with Chabad in Austin, and they were
Oh,
here.
yay.
They were here for my mom's unveiling, sadly, and they they went to Chabad here the first Friday, and like, so they are getting that message, and that's a hard line in the sand for me. And I was like, okay, go ahead, Deanie, make fun of me, but I'm telling them that. Like,
Not making fun. I am so happy. Oh, you just got muted somehow.
yeah. So I think you called me out a few times tonight, but I just wanted to admit, like, that mama that you're talking about, that there's a hard line, like, you know, and I will say, I don't know how I got it. Like, I don't care if you eat a cheeseburger, but you are marrying a Jewish girl, and I am getting Jewish grandbabies, and so you definitely called me out.
So I want to say a few things. Firstly, kudos to you for taking another step and giving up something. I know you said it was easy. I'm sure it wasn't that easy. Make any lifestyle change you make is a big deal. I also think that it's, the Tanya's like kind of giving us a step-by-step manual. This is a tool. It's a tool to use when you need it. If for you thinking about, being connected to God is enough motivation to get you to do the right thing all the time, go with it. You don't have to utilize this. I think this tool, this meditation comes into place when I'm facing a decision that I'm really having a hard time making the decision. Like I know what the right thing is, and I can't get myself to do it. This is another tool that I can tap into. You'll see later on in Tanya that Tanya doesn't want us to be tapping into our hidden love, is what it calls this, all the time. This is like, it's like a backup. Like if all my inspiration and all the positivity hasn't worked yet, and I need to make a decision, this is something that I can tap into because I know it's like there's like a default setting there. Like, worst case, I know I don't want to be disconnected from God. So boom, I can sound that alarm. The one other thing I'm going to say is, and I know it's come up before, is that there's a concept in Hasidic teachings that when you have two people running, two people are running. Who's going to run faster? One is running towards a pot of gold. Let's say, I don't know, $1 million, a big prize, whatever it is. The other one is running away from a lion or running away from someone who's trying to kill him. Who's going to run faster? The running away from danger, for whatever reason, it pushes us further. So again, if the positive works, let's do positive. But if I'm reaching a point where the positive is not working for me, or at least in this particular situation, the positive is not inspiring me enough, then I could talk to myself this way, and again, I can get myself to run even faster. Yes, Harriet.
So you actually just touched on something that I was struggling with, and that is that I think more in terms of psychological than I do in terms of, oh, I'm doing this to be closer to God. And whether it was how I was brought up or whatever. So it's, again, I guess that's part of my journey is I'm obviously I'm much more comfortable in thinking in terms of psychological terms and being consistent with my beliefs, what I state, my beliefs and my values. And so, like, throughout the conversation tonight, and I was thinking, when do I think, oh, I'm going to do this or not do this because it will bring me closer to God, or it will sever, push me away from God, as opposed to what I usually do is and I know for you, the one you brought, it's like being Jewish doesn't necessarily the first thing I think of in terms of being Jewish is not necessarily closeness to God, which sounds ridiculous now when I say it, but that's kind of, I mean, marrying somebody Jewish is because we're a peoplehood, it's part of how we survived for 5,000 years. Not because we said, does this bring me closer to God, or does this sever my relationship with God? And so I'm kind of struggling with, okay, maybe my next step, maybe the reason I'm struggling with it is my next step in terms of having quit buying non-kosher meat and having quit eating non-kosher meat out, and my progression in terms of being a vanity is to really pay more attention to my relationship with God, and to think about, oh, okay, I want that relationship with God, and I'm doing it because of wanting to strengthen that relationship. I mean, I don't know if it makes any sense. I'm still just trying, but it just, you kept talking about the closeness with God and the closeness with God, and I'm like, okay, I hear you and I understand, but that's not, at least that has not been, I'll say, before I started Tanya, the framework in which I thought about my Jewish identity.
100%. But I think that Tanya follows that. The Tanya understands that psychology, and that's why he tells us, wait, I know you don't think about relationship with God all the time, but you know that if someone were to hold a gun to your head and say, are you willing to convert or die? You would definitely say, I'd rather die as a Jew. Because you don't want to be disconnected. You know that deep down. Now, if you think about that enough, you can translate that now into other actions. Like, I have the opportunity now to take an action of connection or disconnect. It's the same me inside. Why is it that I'm okay with doing X, Y, and Z that's severing, or ruining my connection, but I'm not okay with denouncing my faith? Right? So and about the positive psychology, I'm thinking about it, and you have to realize that Tanya's talking about self-talk. It's not talking about how to get others to do the right thing. There's a big difference here. When I'm talking to other people, there's a big emphasis on positivity. It's not my job to tell other people, that this is a disconnect. And, I don't think anyone's ever managed to inspire anyone to do the right thing by scaring them into it or by fear mongering. But when I'm talking to myself, I need to be real with myself. I think of an example, like if I'm, take a driving on the highway example. If I'm driving on the highway and I'm having a great time and I know the highway's totally empty, there's no one driving, it's like 3 a.m., maybe I'm not being so careful with staying exactly in my lane. But doesn't matter so much. No one else is on the highway anyway. But what if I knew that there's a car in the lane right next to me? I mean, we know we drive very differently if you've ever driven on those narrow country roads. And it's like you have to work hard to stay in your lane. But if you know there's a car in the lane next to you, it's like, wait, I don't want to move even 1 inch into the next lane because that's going to be the end of it. God forbid, right? So suddenly it's like there's a fire burning in me that's not allowing me to move past this place. All of the positive talk in the world couldn't make me as careful to stay in my lane as realizing that going into the next lane is likely going to cause an accident. So I think that's the psychology that the Tanya is using here, is how do I talk to myself when I'm in that situation where yeah, I can inspire myself to do the right thing. It may work, it may not work, it may take a long time, but there's a decision right in front of me. I'm standing at a fork in the road. Do X or do Y? How do I get myself to do X when I really just want to do Y? Again, this is another tool in the toolbox. If we don't want to tap into it, or we don't need to tap into it most of the time, let's hope that we don't need to most of the time. But it's always something that I can fall back on if I were to need to. Have a good night, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Deanie. This was a great class. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody, for your feedback. It makes
Yes,
it
thank you, everybody who
deeper
joined
and richer.
participated.
Thanks.